Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to today's webinar, The Secret to Transforming Performance Management is Learning, presented by Cornerstone OnDemand. I'm Dawn Presentine, Senior Marketing Strategist at Cornerstone, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. Before we begin, let's go over some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with a copy of the recording when it becomes available. If you'd like to ask a question, you may do so at any time using the Q&A box on the top right-hand side of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can during the last 5 to 10 minutes of the webinar. We will be running a poll today, and you can participate by using the panel on the right-hand side of the screen when the poll is opened. If you experience any technical issues, please message me in the chat, and I'll do my best to assist you. Now let's get started. Steve Dabrowski will be your presenter today, so I'm going to hand it over to Steve to start the webinar. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you everybody for joining us today. This was a very popular webinar, so it seems that the topic of learning and performance management combined are pretty pressing in terms of the minds of the folks that are doing the work. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I work for Cornerstone OnDemand, but prior to Cornerstone OnDemand, I worked as the Director of Talent Management for a Treasury Shared Service Center in the Department of Treasury. I also was the Chief Learning Officer for the IRS, head of all leadership leadership development and training for the Internal Revenue Service. I've also had various stints within Treasury, but I've come to Cornerstone with about 12 years of experience in the federal government. I've helped organizations think about their talent management needs in terms of learning and also performance. And nowadays, what I do is I get the fancy title of thought leadership. So what I help people do is think through and strategic implementation of talent management initiatives within Cornerstone. And even beyond that, even if you're not implementing Cornerstone, we are out speaking about those subjects and matters that are important to customers such as yourselves, both in the public sector and also in the private sector. And having a background in the public sector and now seeing some of the things that are going on in the private sector, you know, for the longest time I thought being in the federal government was so unique in that the issues that I was facing in the federal government aren't relevant to the private sector and vice versa, and that I couldn't be further from the truth in that thought. There are regulations and processes that we must follow in the public sector that don't necessarily apply to the private sector, but the reverse is true as well, right? So think of any agencies, organizations, commercial or not, we all face regulations and we all have to comply with different things. So one of the things that we used to do in the IRS and in Treasury is benchmark against what's going on in industry. And if this were an industry, performance management is relatively immature in the public space. And by immature, I mean learning management systems and learning as a whole has been involved in our work on a daily basis for a number of years. Think of the maturity of the LMS, think of compliance certification requirements. The public sector is no stranger to learning. Where we are a little bit stranger to is the performance management and what's going on in performance management. What's really interesting in performance management, and we'll get into this, is there's a lot of various thoughts on it, and we'll talk about some case studies today. We'll talk about what agencies are seeing and what best practices they might use. So I am going to, you should see my background. Don, can you confirm?
Yes, it's your background slide that's up.
Okay, great. So if we start diving into the actual, I think it's important to get into the context, right? So you know, work has been changing, and almost every generation has said this because work has changed and it continues to change. Whether you credit that to the generation shifting or whether you acknowledge that the technology has a big driver, what's clear is that we've got 5 generations in the workforce, first time ever that that's happened. And what work we're doing is actually changing. The technology is actually forcing us to do stuff differently. where we're doing our work. Most of you have already faced the hurdles of teleworking or flex-a-place. A lot of agencies and organizations are establishing hoteling space where we don't even have dedicated workspace, so the where is actually changing. When we're doing our work, some folks are actually working after hours, flexible hours, weekends, and how we're actually doing the work, what we're actually using to do the work has actually changed. The technology's had a big impact on this. We're seeing a lot of functionality and capabilities done through iPads or tablets and smart mobile phones. So the how is also changing. I think it's also important to take a look at some statistics of what's going on in the actual workforce. You know, just some facts that I'm certain you guys have seen in some shape or fashion, but just to cement it for you all. Every day, there's over 10,000 folks that are turning 65, and we've had 48 million people change jobs just last year, and this is taken from Burson by Deloitte statistics. And what we also saw in the survey is, even if you're happy in your job, even if you're well-intentioned, you're engaged, 71% of folks are either actively or are open to a new job. And what that means is that even if you're happy with your new job, you'd accept a call or conversation with a recruiter. So organizations really need to be making their employees feel the love. And by feel the love, I mean more engaged, tied to the agency mission, high-performing, engaged, and willing to go the extra mile. When we looked at the difference between high performers and in terms of engagement, we saw that 42% of those that are considered high performer are much less engaged than the people that are considered low performers. So even if we can determine who's the high performer or the low performer, those that are high are a lot less engaged than their counterparts. It says that we're not really taking care of the people that are actually achieving our work, and we can do that by a number of ways. I would posit that combining learning and performance would be one way that we actually can address that. As we start to take a look at the workforce and where it's going, we keep hearing the generational difference that's going to be such a big crushing blow. The millennials are coming, right? It's not just the millennials that are having the impact. We're seeing a shift from the retirement, as the previous slide mentioned, but we have multi-generations making up the work, and this forecasted out to 2022, and this was from the Bureau of Labor Statistics study that looked at what does our population look like in terms of the various workforce and generations. You can see right around 2012, we started to see a shift in the generational flow. So 25 to 54 starts going down, and we're seeing a reverse of that when we get to the 55 to 64. So we're seeing this influx of younger talent coming into the workforce. And what that says really is the millennials are no longer coming, they're already here. And we're already preparing for the next generation beyond the millennials in today's workforce. So when we start talking about performance management, I think it's important to take a look at what's going on. And typically this is in the private sector. A lot of the advanced studies, pilots are done in private sector, but some of them, as you'll see, do touch government agencies in some shape or fashion, and they are being creative. Now, what we see when we talk about traditional performance management, we see a one-time event, or in this instance, we have you establish your plan, a mid-year review, and then end of year, right? So it's on the goals that we establish at the beginning of the year. It's very process-driven. We must follow this and check each boxes. We also only focus in on those people that are considered leaders in terms of rewarding and excelling folks that are doing well. On existing leaders, we don't look for potentials. It's also based on your tenure, right? So if you're here longer, it's typically considered that you're going to do better in terms of performance management. And then there is an emphasis on the appraisal. So how many times have you gone into a performance discussion only to realize that your folks are just concerned about whether you got rated as a 4 versus a 5 or a 3 versus a 2? You know, to replace that with any number you want, but the important thing is the appraisal. And why is the appraisal important? Because it reflects what we actually think about our employees' performance over the last year. It's a concrete number that they can reflect that determines whether my organization loves me or doesn't, values me at a superior or outstanding level, right? It's all about the appraisal. And then so many things are tied to that appraisal. Your merit pay, your increases, your bonuses. What we're seeing now in different organizations is there's a break between the appraisal and performance management process. You, I'm certain, have seen some of the research that says that organizations are going to rating list performance reviews. You know, I'm not arguing or thinking that the public sector government would be able to go to such a thing, but I think there are some interesting trends in this approach that would benefit the government and the public sector as a whole. So what we're seeing going on with performance management is that it's, instead of an annual event, it's more ongoing. It's something that takes place on a semi-regular basis. We're seeing some organizations or some companies that are going to bi-weekly, monthly conversations. It's just the check-in kind of conversation. Another trend that we're seeing, rather than process and establish the actual process, is more about the people. It's focused in on the people development. And instead of actually looking for where did you screw up in your performance management, or where did you do really well, it's talking a little bit about the past, but it's more about focused in on where are we going to develop you in your needs, right? So what do you as the individual employee want or need to achieve in the organization, and how can I help you as your supervisor get this, right? There's a fundamental responsibility of managers to have that to have that conversation with their employees. The other thing that another trend that's coming out is it's creating pipeline for developing leaders. We're seeing a lot more effort going into developing a cadre of leaders, right? So a bench strength. So we're not just focused in on Sam because Sam did great last year. We're focused in on Sam, Harry, Paul, Linda, all the people that are potential leaders or say that they want to be developed as leaders. We're focusing in on developing the leaders, of whether they're current or whether they're future, right? So focusing on developing them. We're also seeing, and this is probably no different than what you've seen in the past in learning trends, is the learning has to be on demand. You know, an interesting statistic, in 2012, our attention spans were about 12 seconds. The average adult attention span was 12 seconds. In 2016, our attention span is down to 7 seconds. And just as a point of reference, a goldfish attention span is 8 seconds. So we're 1 second lower than a goldfish in terms of attention span. So that need to deliver training on demand when it's needed, short bits, think TED Talks. Even nowadays, when we start thinking of TED Talks are becoming too long because they may go on for a couple minutes, right? So it's that short, on-demand, contextual learning that is taking place with the development. And then the focus then goes, instead of the emphasis on appraisal, what we're seeing is a break from the appraisal, your score, your merit increase, and your performance discussion or your developmental discussion. And we're seeing that that development discussion take more of a performance-related matter. And so what I would like to do is I would like to toss up our first poll question, perhaps. So the first question is, how much of your performance process has learning involved with it? Meaning, how many of you as organizations combine learning and performance in the conversation? Your managers are having this conversation. Most of it for A, some of it for B, or C, none of you are combining it. So I'm going to ask that the poll be open. And I know that we have to be patient on this. And this will be one of several poll questions that we actually take. And I'm going to wait patiently for the responses to come in. And you should be selecting A for most of your performance has learning involved, B for some of it, and C for none of it. And most of you said some of it or none. Most of it, you said some of it. It'd be interesting to see in some of the questions and answers about how are we combining performance and learning in your agencies, and what effect is it having on the process? So interesting results. So when we look further at what's going on with performance management, so some of you are saying some of it has to do with it, but majority of the folks that were asked in the Brandon Hall survey on performance management is saying that about 60%, just shy of 60%, are saying that we haven't made any approaches in performance management. We haven't changed anything. But what is really interesting is what we're starting to see is the separation. About a quarter of the folks said that we're separating our performance discussion from our merit increase discussion. So we're having conversations about your performance and moving forward, as opposed to here's what your score is and here's what your pay is going to be, right? We also see some folks that are getting away from rating scales. There's a number of different organizations that just tossed out their rating scale. They're placing their employees in categories. It was the Juniper Network, which is a big cable company, and Juniper Network actually forced their employees into categories, either they're J players or non-J players, and that then dictated where they were in the spectrum. So we're seeing this numerical rating score to go away, and we're leaving it to our managers and our supervisors to set the bonuses and the pays, our merit increases. So again, this is private sector. I know that the flexibility that we have in the public sector is a lot more limited, but what is really interesting is down at the bottom where you see that a lot of the conversation or a lot of the stuff that's going on is more frequent conversations, right? So in the moment conversations and feedback, and making sure that we're setting shorter term goals. I can remember often when I sat down for my performance review while in the federal government, how different my goals were at the beginning than they were at the end, right? So how many of my goals have changed. Sometimes we don't have systems to make the changes in, and even if we do have systems to make the changes in, it's often cumbersome, and it forces the reapproval of goals and metrics in an organization. So sometimes we avoid doing that because it upsets the apple cart. So we're not really doing performance management its due justice by not paying attention to these types of things and not having these conversations. You know, I always say that I have a Fitbit, and I look at my Fitbit on a regular basis. And what would be interesting, I have daily results, and I'm able to track and have a direct impact on that. It would be interesting if I didn't get my results until the end of the year in my Fitbit. What corrective behaviors could I take if I don't get the score on my Fitbit until the end of the year? So that goes to the point of needing more feedback. Once I get my feedback from my Fitbit, I'm going to know after this hour that I need to get up and walk around because I can take corrective actions because I can see the data. So if we are not giving our folks information and feedback, how are they going to know that they need to do something differently? And I'm not arguing for structured, formal conversations. I'm just quick check-in meetings are what we're seeing going on in organizations, and they're being quite effective with it. So one of the things that we learned when we looked at some of the human capital management things that were important, right? So what should you be paying attention to when we talk learning and development and performance management? And this was according to Brendan Hall, again, in terms of human capital management practices. So 80% of the folks said that learning and development are critical, are the #1 things that we should be focused in on. Talent management, when we start to get to a broader concept of combining performance and learning together, the overall picture of our employees. Leadership development, those top 3 are all about the topics that we're talking about, learning and performance management, right? So learning and development in the context of performance. What we're seeing as organizations in terms of HR and what their priorities are for organizations that are going through some sort of change within performance management and learning management is that they're most effective when they engage their partners. So engaging your partners might mean subject matter experts within your organization or managers and employees to get their actual opinion on how things are working and how things are going. What we also see is organizations that are going through changes and are implementing different things, it's paramount to make sure that you're clearly communicating it. Nothing kills performance management or initiatives, for that matter, any HR initiatives, than lack of communication and lack of transparency. Whatever we do and however we do it, we've seen HR organizations say time and time again that making sure that communication happens both from HR to us, to the organization, and also get out of the way of the manager-employee conversation. Let them have the conversation, create the environment, find people that are doing it well, reward them. We also are seeing that in performance management, critical components of it obviously are demonstrating accountability. Nothing is worse than not following through with your performance management specifics. If there are poor performers, we find that those organizations that take action appropriately are a lot more effective in terms of performance management. What that does, if we don't address it, is it bleeds over to other people. Other people see it, and it has an impact on it. And then finally, making sure that we're taking time to reward and recognize the folks that are doing it well, but also folks that are performing well. It's important that we find examples of people that are doing it well and rewarding them for that and making it very public so people are aware that you as an organization are paying attention to that. So really gets into getting away from talent management and going into people management, making people are the focus of our talent management initiative. We all know that these stats are true, right? So it's easier for an employee to find a job outside of your organization than it is inside. So about just half of us said that it's easier for someone to find an outside job. What that really says to us is that we're not doing a good job of making our career paths or what's developmental activities in our organization clear to our employees, and that's a disservice to us as an organization. So I'd rather look outside or get a job outside because it's a little bit easier. We know that it's more expensive by a lot to hire from outside than it is from growing your talent within. It's also faster. We can promote and build faster, so that importance of having those career paths known and communicated becomes even that much more important. And we know that those people that we do promote from within, they're likelier to do better, they're likelier to perform better, they're likelier to be our high performers. So we really know who we are when we are promoting our folks. We know what we're getting when we're actually having these internal conversations and developing our internal folks for our internal growth activities. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the philosophies and some of the lessons learned that I think we can use in the public sector that we're seeing in the private sector and some of those studies that are going on, right? So I think the first one might be the most important thing for me is giving context to the individuals of what development activities we're talking about or what individual situations we're talking about. So that whole argument of holding off the conversation until later on in the year, really, if we do that, we miss the chance of setting the context for our individual employees. They lose the opportunity to actually grow and change. We don't give them the benefit of understanding the impact that whatever they decided to do or not do had on an organization. We really need to shift our focus from the aha, I got you, or this is what you didn't do on your performance review, to developing your whole person. Yes, we do need to talk about your goals and your commitments and what you accomplish and what you could look to do in the future, but we really want to focus in on how are we moving forward. So it goes to speak to, instead of looking out the back windshield, we're actually going to look through the front windshield when we're talking about in dealing with our employees. Actually, I screwed that statement up. It's supposed to be, instead of looking in the rearview mirror, we're looking out the windshield. I'll get it right one of these times. But what we're also seeing effective in performance management is when we combine performance management and consider it as a journey. So it's not just a one stop and you're done, or it's not just a performance conversation and phew, we're happy that that's over. It really is a conversation, and we're here together, and we're going to continue moving forward. And then finally, the actual the federal government, public sector, wherever you are, city, state, local government, what we find in public sector is that a vein that runs really big is that the service that you're doing here in your organization, it has a purpose, and you are, as a government employee, performing a valuable service to the citizens, and there's really a lot of power behind that, and anything that you can do to align them to the agency mission and goals will better serve you. And then just shy of the folks, or just shy of half of the folks that were surveyed here in the Brandon Hall study said that just shy of half said that their performance management is based on developing employee strengths. I mean, that says it all, right? So our performance management, if you ask our purpose of what a performance management component is or why we do performance management, it's to improve the employee's performance, to reinforce what's going well, and to take steps to correct or develop them in future activities and future journeys, right? So if we can focus in on the strengths rather than, over half the folks saying that it's based on something else, you'll see greater success, and I think that that's a trend that continues into the public sector as well. So what we're seeing as terms of process and the people that are going on, what we're seeing with specifically at the talent level, we're seeing organizations that are implementing new performance management appraisal processes that are going to be more in line with check-ins, right? So that biweekly, monthly, whatever frequency it is, that opportunity for a quick, hey, how's it going? Here's what we want to focus in on the next couple of weeks. That's shorter-term goals. And we realize that the employees are at a spot where they're not necessarily focused in on the development that we need to, so we need to have a conversation with them about their performance management and their development needs on a one-to-one basis. We need to realize that the way people are working goes, instead of if you're in this organization, you work together, we are really having a revision of how we approach our work. We're going into smaller teams. We should be providing leadership opportunities from day one and making them transparent. We know our management has to shift from managing projects and people together, and also be able to separate that when we start to talk about the actual people and focus in on the individual personal development. What we also have found effective in organizations that are shifting the performance management process is the use of coaches and mentors, and this is no surprise, or should be no surprise to the public sector, in that it really is people listening to other people in their organization, in their orbit, or even outside their orbit of their organization. People are relying on what others are telling them, and so they're seeking out, employees are seeking out, whether that's through your direct chain of command or not, people for advice in terms of career development and career management. And what's interesting now is and what we did at the IRS was this idea of a hackathon. And I don't know if you're familiar with what a hackathon is, but what it does is, it's a reliance of your internal subject matter experts to gather a group of people randomly to build a developmental discussion or an event on a specific topic. So, for example, we did in IRS, we did a knowledge management hackathon where we brought all the people in and we had a conversation about knowledge management. We had some people that were experts in it. And what that did was it provided a valuable learning opportunity and also something for the organization as well. And that we got feedback from our employees, and we were able to incorporate some of the things that we learned on that hackathon into what we're actually doing for the IRS in terms of knowledge management. What we're seeing that do to the organization, though, so what we're seeing is the visibility of the learning and development organization as a whole is not being front and center. We're more of now guides on the sides. We're creating context and situations for our employees to have and take development, and it's not so structured. We're not, only formalized on formal classrooms, but we're making it a little bit more from the side recommendation, as opposed to you must go to HR, you must go to L&D to have your performance management and your learning discussions, right? So we're seeing it shift and blend into the background. We're also seeing it become electronic. More and more folks are combining, when we start talking learning and development, and performance, we're seeing them use systems to actually make this measurable and something that we can report as an organization. I'd be interested in seeing how many of you on the phone have actually implemented a performance management system and combined that with learning, and what value that you've seen at this. And a couple bullets on that whole looking at the rearview mirror and providing guidance for the future, looking out the windshield, making sure that we take every effort to reduce the red tape in terms of the process itself, making sure that we're focused in on the whole entire system and the whole entire individual, and then making sure that we see from the employee's viewpoint or eyes what the process looks like, and we're taking steps to correct anything that we see as going awry or not being super effective in terms of the overall process and getting us what we were looking at. So I mentioned a couple of case studies. First one I want to toss out, and this being so recently after lunch, wherever you are, I'm sure it's right around lunchtime in some places. So this takes a look at what the Kentucky Fried Chicken did, and this was, they had a major talent drain, and what they were finding is that people were leaving quicker than they could keep on, right? So we had high turnover rates for front and second level staff, so they were leaving. They were having this massive turnout. What they did was they implemented this idea of a people promise and how they were going to manage their individuals. So what they did is they took an intervention and they started having conversations with the frontline managers and gave them more structured conversational pieces focused in on development activities, and that was the conversation that we had with our employees. And they went further, and they had this card that they wanted you to fill out. This was your pocket guard for the general managers and the managers to have a conversation. They asked these 6 questions on a monthly basis. And it's a little blurry, but what they are is essentially conversations about performance. Here's what we felt went well this week or this month. How do you think it went well? What sort of impact do you think you had? How could we improve the experience that you had over the last month? What motivates you at work? Are we having motivational conversations? And where do you see your career in 2 years? And so it's all about these conversations about development and activities, and it's combined with a performance management conversation. So we're having a learning and performance discussion at the exact same time, and the focus, by the way, is on the individual, right? So what is, you see your career, where do you want to be in 2 years? What could we do to improve it for you? What could I do to change and help you achieve what it is you're trying to accomplish? So it's all focused in on the individual employees. What we know when we talk performance management, and this was a McKinsey study that was done in 2012, those that are most effective, that we focus our energy in on development of leaders who can drive real change. We need folks to be standing up and being the force of change. We need to give them the tools and resources they need to roll out those changes and to affect change across the organization. We need to increase our succession planning, whether you call it succession planning or not. It really is succession planning when we're spending time and resources to develop a cadre of leaders and making them ready to step in now, as opposed to Sam is leaving, so we're going to have Doris as the replacement. We have instead a cadre of leaders a bench strength that we can choose from. We want to take steps to create an engaging culture, and I know engagement is a huge thing across the federal government and public sector as a whole. There are any number of engagement surveys, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey in particular, that gets to this idea of engagement culture, so I know it's front of mind for a lot of you. What I think the last bullet is making sure that we have a purpose and sustain superior results, making sure that we know where we're going with our organizations and our development and our conversations, and making sure that any thing that we can do to contribute to transparency, we will reinforce that. Because we know that the problems out here are about 60% of the folks believe that our college graduates aren't ready for the work, right? 75% of the businesses say that we have a shortage on their mid-level managers. And then just over half of them say, we still don't have enough executives. So it's focusing in on where those real leaders can make a real difference and give them the resources that they need to begin doing the work that we need them to do. I will also say that it's important, and this is one of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill, and he said that perfection is the enemy of progress. And so even if we don't have it built 100%, I think it's important if you're considering doing these types of things, get started. Make sure you know where you're going generally, but don't wait until you have all your ducks in a row in order to get going, or you're not going to get started at all, right? So important to build as you grow and to continue to grow. That brings up our next poll question. So if we were to talk the leadership development priorities in your organization, what's the most important priority for you? Is it A, developing leaders to drive strategic change, filling gaps in your leadership pipeline at B? Is it driving culture change? Is it accelerating time to performance in D? Is it E, driving engagement? F, diversifying the leadership pipeline? Or G, becoming more purpose and values driven? So pick one of those as what is the most important to your organization in terms of developing your leaders. Once we get the results, we'll stack those against what we found in a broader survey. What are the most important leadership development priorities in your organization? And I'm going to give you guys time to respond to that. And there are the results. So 70% of you said nothing. So about 10% said that you're filling gaps in your leadership pipeline. So let's take a look at how that stacks up against what others have said. And this is from Brandon Hall again, where we looked at it. So most of the folks, 66% are developing leaders to drive strategic change, right? So these are the most important for them as an organization. So leaders developing, driving strategic change, and also just like you guys, filling gaps in your leadership pipeline is the second and most important, and also about driving culture change. So the top three are right along with what we were talking about earlier and what you guys said on the actual survey as being important. So I think that's right in line with what we saw at a much broader pulse. So I guess our survey is scientifically correct. Then please don't ding me on that one. I know it's not scientifically correct. So, so one of the things that I think is important is that out of our executives, most of them believe that our levels of leadership are not ready for development or ready for leadership. So our folks that are queued up for leaders are not necessarily ready for the next level. And this is one thing that we also did really well at the IRS, is that we had multi-levels stratified for different development. So we had frontline readiness. I think I am ready to be a frontline manager, to a frontline course. So I am a frontline manager. And then the next level up is the senior manager readiness course. So I think I'm ready to be a senior manager. And then another level of development when we're at the senior level, the senior manager level. And then finally, the last tier of the development was, I think I'm ready to be an SES, so a candidate readiness program that will take you to a candidate development program, which ultimately leads you to be the SES. So we stratified based on the various levels of the leadership, and we delivered content repeatedly and consistently. And by the way, we did it almost all internally, where we had very few vendors that we delivered our training to. We relied on our subject matter experts. So that whole idea of empowering your folks and making sure that we're leveraging the strengths that we have on staff was really something that we followed. And I know that IRS is still doing that to this day. So how can we help? How can we help our folks and our managers and our employees understand and have these conversations, right? So I think some things that we could put out there for our folks is making sure that we have, instead of long-term goals and objectives that we have measured at mid-year and end of year, let's focus in on activities and projects for our managers. Let's focus in on the shorter-term opportunities for interventions and have those conversations a lot more regularly than we are currently, because I think if we have a chance to course correct, I think we will much better serving our population. Make sure that we also keep our mind on what's next. So if we're focused in on activities and projects, we need to know what's going to be coming next. We don't have to have it all fleshed out at this point, but having a mind to it is to know that we're going to have to put something in front of these folks on a regular basis. So what managers should be thinking about what next with our employees and how are we going to help them get there. How do we know we're going to be successful? How are we knowing? What do we know we will have as a result of whatever it is that we're working on? How will we know we're successful? How do we align that to your agency's goals or your missions? How do they see that organizational buy-in? How do we give them an organizational purpose? And are we allowing for truly reflective self-evaluations? And I don't mean, hey, write up your accomplishments and then we'll do the end of your conversation. I really mean to do some sort of self-evaluation that is honest, that you may or may not share with me as a manager, but you take some time to reflect as an individual employee against your goals, against your organizational goals, and all your expectations that your manager has for you as well. Are we really giving ourselves a self-evaluation, and is it an honest self-evaluation? So anything that we can do to help clear those expectations for our employees and our managers will do much better off. So this gets to the one case study that I wanted to show you, because this has a lot to do with BAE, and BAE is a big defense contractor that does a lot of work with the Defense Department. So they've shifted how they do their performance management to bring in a learning management component. And they said that any solution that they bring, they're going to have to do a self-assessment, also with a formal assessment done by the manager. But in order to get to a solution, we're going to rely 70%, and this follows the 70-20-10 module for those that are familiar with that. 70% is going to be on the job. We're going to have career conversations about 20% of the time. That's going to have a developmental situation. So that's where we're going to have this opportunity to identify training and development needs. We're also going to rely on mentoring and coaching and networking and social networking to get them exposed to developmental activities. And then we're only going to spend about 10% on formal instructor-led training, or even like something internal in your LMS, like a Books 24/7 or any other electronic content delivery system. Only 10% of it. The real meat of it is going to be learning on the job and exposure from others. So it really came and reinforced that idea that not a lot of the learning and development that we do happens in a formal setting. And not a lot of it, to be honest, happens in your learning management systems. And a lot of learning management systems today are shifting to start to realize that and accept it. When you start to see stuff like XAPI, which may be a fancy term, but essentially what it means is any learning can happen anywhere and get recorded within your LMS. So if I went and I read a newspaper article and I wanted to record that as a developmental activity, I can do that now, and LMSs that allow API or tin can learning. So it's really changing the way we're tracking our system and tracking what we actually consider development nowadays. They went one further in BAE, and they established these partnerships instead of having goals. What they actually started with was creating a delegate-manager partnership. And so instead of employee supervisor, we have a delegate and a manager. And what I really liked about this is they gave some formal guidance to what the conversation should look like, right? What did you agree to? And these are the things that we agreed to, and these are the things that we're going to talk about every month. So how do I support my delegate on the journey? How am I probing to ask what he or she is learning? How am I applying, making sure that I'm providing opportunities for my delegate to apply the learning that we have? And how am I recognizing those individuals that are doing what we're asking them to do? And then how are we sharing that knowledge? Because how are we getting the recognition that they need? So they boiled it down, and I know we like our acronyms here in the public sector, so they have SPARK. So support, probe, apply, recognize, and knowledge share. And what they found was this is really effective at shaping performance conversations and more focused in on learning conversations. So we really get the focus on the individual user and the people as opposed to the actual process. This seems like a no-brainer for me, but what we found is whether there was a existing coaching culture, we found that those that had the ability to manage like a coach as opposed to manage like the boss, right? So be more supportive in developmental conversations and moving forward and giving them in the environment and the tools that they need to support are much more effective in accomplishing the work. And I will also say I do believe this is a key indicator in terms of engagement, has a really big impact on whether employees feel the love. And this does not mean that you need to go out and hire expensive coaches. This means give your managers the tools to have the coaching conversations like BAE did, like the Kentucky Fried Chicken did. It's a really easy change. Give them the tools and stuff that they need in order to have these types of conversations as opposed to aha, gotcha conversations that have typically been the substance of performance management up until in a lot of organizations up until now. So managing a coach is important, making sure that we have continuous development, that it's not just, hey, we're going to have this conversation and we're going to forget everything that you talked about until the next time we do a check-in. Making sure that we're doing stuff to reinforce that SPARK model, making sure that we're reinforcing, making sure that we're giving them opportunities to apply their learning, making sure that we're having honest conversations about strengths and opportunities. Again, managing like a coach and making sure that we're focused in on what's next. And those are really good guidelines for having conversations with your folks in terms of more performance-based or more development-based performance conversations. So I have one more case study, and what I really wanted to show you this one was this notion of developing folks to be ready when we need them. This is Isbank, Turkey, bank in Turkey, and this is important because what its shift is, we have the candidates and we go through training and evaluation and competency assessments. We have 1 year of a program. We have a blended learning where we're having folks in the field versus formal learning. We have a consultant talk to them about the development planning conversation, and we're constantly communicating with them. And what we did was what these guys did was develop a group of people that were qualified to step into the next role when they were needed. They found it very effective. What they did was, as the population was identified, they conducted a gap analysis. So it requires knowing what is required for the job, the next level that we're talking about, whatever position, leadership or not. It could also be a mission-critical occupation that we're working on as well. But it involves having a gap analysis. So you believe this about your skills and capabilities, and I, as a manager, believe this. Where's the gap? How are we going to develop ourselves in terms of moving forward? And then what are some of our goals? How do we reshift this program to continue to improve? And we saw it be really effective because it was establishing a cadre of people as opposed to focusing in on one individual, one-to-one replacement mentality. So a really good model to follow in terms of identify gaps, identify development activities, and then look at some of the goals that we have for you as an organization. And I'm going to speed up a little bit because I'm getting near my timeline, and I do want to allow for a couple moments to talk about. So how can we have our folks focusing in on development, right? So we could build in activities for a skills check, whether that's a quick little quiz, whether that's a quick evaluation, post-project evaluation, making sure that our employees know who they are in the organization and what their brand is and what their reputation is, and making sure that others are watching as well, fostering opportunities for networking, giving folks an opportunity to collaborate. Look, we all like to socialize. Every one of us, I'm sure, has been on Facebook, but we see how others are doing in their career with LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. The opportunity and the commonality there is that we like to share and we like to be recognized. and we like to collaborate. So any opportunities that we can do in the workplace that will allow that will serve the employees and will make for a more engaged climate. How do we make our career path clear? How do I, as an employee in the IRS, know where and how I get to the next level? Or in your organization, how do you get to the next level? If we were to ask you a whole question, and we're not going to ask you this, but if we were, it'd be interesting to see if you know where your next path is and next step in your career is. Because folks on average are going to have 11 careers over their lifetime, 11 jobs in their career. So how are we planning for that and fostering that and using it to our advantage for our employees? Because they're going to do it, and if they're not going to do it and you're not going to help me, I'm going to do it elsewhere. And making sure that we're exploring the skills and interests, giving opportunities like the IRS thing that I mentioned, where we're allowing our folks to be the teachers, to reinforce that where their interest, and then just be able to foster the collaboration and the networking in terms of social components. One other thing that is, and you heard me mention this earlier, is that we're seeing a concerted effort to strip the compensation conversation away from performance. So you aren't actually, and this is predominantly the private sector, may not be applicable to the public sector, but I wanted you to see it as well, because the concept is the same. Instead of having performance and bonus and merit conversations together, what we're doing is having a separate conversation about your performance against your goals, how does it compare against others, you know, where's the budget, and we're having the conversation separate, and then we're looking at, like, okay, in the private sector, we're comparing that against what the market is paying them. So in other words, what would they be able to get if they walked out the door from my company and went to somewhere else? So we're using that data in terms of private sector. Now, obviously, that's not going to be relevant to the public sector, but what's important here is the separation of performance and compensation conversations. And it's important because it shifts the focus onto the employee and not about what that score is. And that score is my evaluation, my compensation, and what you as an organization think of me, instead of what you as a supervisor are talking to me about. So it really is, does a great job of separating those two, because truly I do believe performance and compensation conversations should be separated. And finally, our last poll, and we have a few minutes left. If you keep performance and learning separate, what's the reason that they're separate? Is it A, it's the way we've always done it? Is it B, we do it because of union concerns? Is it because we have lack of learning at an agency? Or we have no knowledge on how to weave them together? Or is there something else? And the polls are open now. So if you take a moment, and I will wait patiently for the results to come in. And we should be seeing them come in just about now. If you do keep performance and learning separate, why is it that you always do? Why do you do that? And the results are still not coming in.
It's being tallied.
Okay. Okay. We know that because it's the way we've always done it. It's about a quarter of you said that it's the way we've always done it. And I do want to address the union one, because I've heard this one before. I would be a little cautious about accepting that as the reason why we can't have performance and learning conversations. I would venture to say, if we were to reach out to our union friends and colleagues and approach them about the reasons why we're doing this in terms of performance management and a learning discussion, I think is, again, if we can demystify and make it transparent, I think you would find that that's no longer an obstacle. So interesting. It was because the way we've always done it. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of slides here on best practices and just summary, and then I'll ask for any questions, Dawn, that may have come in. that whole idea of bringing in the union representation, that's a great example of collaborating with and engaging partners, right? So don't feel like you're in this by yourself. Pull in folks that, might have a viewpoint different from yours, your employees, your managers, making sure that we're getting out of the way of social and collaborative learning that happens. Make sure we're fostering opportunities to do experiential development activities. So giving them tasks where they're going to have to learn by doing is often effective. Making sure that whatever we're doing, we're incorporating metrics and we're giving the opportunity for feedbacks. If we're looking at engagement as one of our metrics, making sure that we're tracking that. Again, communication. Can't overestimate the importance of that. And then the importance of establishing any sort of developmental coaching programs. And don't wait until this one's perfect. This can be something very informal. Coaching program does not necessarily mean that you must be coaching certified, but you're allowed or permitted to apply coaching behaviors even if you're not a licensed coach. And then finally, making sure that we're taking our development strategy and tying it to the overall business, making sure that we're in alignment with the goal of the organization, the agency mission, making sure that we're having our change agents throughout the organization, making sure that our developmental activities are contextual and they're meaningful to what they're doing on the job, and making sure that whatever we're doing reinforces that sense of purpose and mission in terms of agency engagement and tie-in. And I believe that is going to be the last slide that I have. So do I have any questions?
So yes, this is the Q&A portion. I realize we're very close to the end of the hour. I think we're going to have to save any questions to email them to Steve directly. Steve's email is sdaborowski@seesaw.com. So if you do have any questions, please go ahead and email them to Steve. I want to thank everyone for joining today's presentation. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you'd like to check out our website, you can visit www.cornerstoneondemand.com for more information. Thank you again.
Thank you.